Today is the Transgender Day of Visibility. And on the What's Up Wenatchee program, we like to look at things in different aspects, on all aspects if we can, and try and get all different parts of the story. So we're going to bring different people on the program today to look at this issue and look at this situation. And we do have the Trans Day of Visibility down at Memorial Park a little bit later on today. But, I would say maybe about maybe 5 to 10 years ago, a lot of people were looking for scapegoats and people to blame, really. And I think people were pointing fingers in certain areas, and maybe our law enforcement was one of those areas. And maybe that tends to be a place where people first look to go, well, maybe are they doing a good enough job? What are they doing? And I tend to think that they're doing a lot better job now than maybe they were doing a decade ago in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I wanted to actually see if that was the case because that's the way that I feel, but maybe other people aren't feeling that way. And so I wanted to get the Wenatchee Police Force captain on with us today, Edgar Reinfeld, and ask him some questions about how well or not well we're doing in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, Captain Reinfeld, thank you so much for spending a few minutes here with me.
Glad to do it.
Thanks. So I know that you have a tough job that covers a lot of different areas. So this is just one aspect of your job, and you've been doing it for a long time. So you've seen the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'm sure change and evolve over the time that you've been doing this. So how have you seen it change, and how well are we dealing with it as far as training our Wenatchee law enforcement?
So I think there's been a lot of changes in the last few years, but I roll back the clock 18 years and about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 18 years and 2 weeks ago, I graduated from the Basic Law Enforcement Academy over in Burien, put on by the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Center. And I will say that during my BLIA experience, we had I believe, a 4-hour block of instruction that was provided by a civilian instructor from an advocacy group in Seattle that was about diversity. And it was a generic diversity. Today, it absolutely would have been spoken as diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was right in line. And it talked about a lot of groups of people based on maybe some racial definitions or some uh, identity definitions to political definitions. It was a broad spectrum, 4 hours discussing different groups and interact. And so 18 years ago, it was a nice, compressed, but not really that broad spectrum introduction to the concept as far as law enforcement. As my career progressed, a couple of years later, we did crisis intervention training, and I was lucky to go to the 40-hour course held locally, which focused heavily on mental health issues and dealing with people with a variety of different mental health conditions, including some amazing training provided by a gentleman named Ellis Amdur, who's a doctor on the West Side, who not only works in this field extensively, but also is really able to demonstrate different conditions. He's a great actor. And so acting a lot of things and helping us find avenues and communication methods that were effective. As time has gone on, we've seen a focus of definitions, like changing the definition of diversity awareness training or diversity training to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we've seen that came out of the Law Enforcement Training and Community Safety Act, that we refer to in shorthand as LATAXA, and I will probably say LATAXA several times in the next few minutes. But out of LATAXA came very specific. And the first block of that training is our 24-hour patrol tactics instruction course, which realistically is 24 hours of dedicated de-escalation and communication. One of the 5 tenets, like the most important of patrol tactics, is communication. And that's communication with everyone, regardless of their identity, their visible background, their apparent outward behavior. Communication, communication, communication. So that's 24 hours of a 40 hours of required training that occurs every 3 years, every officer in the state of Washington. Though it's not required until 2027, Wenatchee Police Department has already trained 100% of our personnel in patrol tactics, which means instead of waiting until closer to 2027 and having people retire and not training them, we felt it was important. So in the first 2 years, we got 100% of our staff trained through our local regional training center, which we also provided 5 instructors. So many, many additional hours of training to be instructors and then instructing people. all over the state at our local. The remaining 16 hours are still in some parts being defined. But some of the elements that we've done here, and I'm going to kind of look down in a way to see my list here, but one of the classes we required as a department last year that was provided as part of LaTexa was a 2.5 hour course called LGBTQ plus core competence. And this course was created in conjunction with CJTC, but with a group directly involved in the LGBTQ community in the Seattle area to build this course. We are Another course that was part of this is the criminal legal system, structural inequalities, monetary sanctions, policy, and reform. And one that is we're requiring for 2023. Let me change pages here real quick. Where is it? Oh, is the the introduction to the historical intersection of race and policing. There's an additional component that is also has to do with policing the Holocaust and looking back at that at a course that we will all be taking probably in 2024 as a department, as we will go through and do these courses so that we continue to expand the knowledge base and our historical perspective on everything that we do. With all of this as well, there's also a 2-hour annual crisis intervention team training that's required for all officers in the state of Washington, or they lose their certification. If you don't complete this 2-hour block of instruction, it doesn't matter if you had 400 hours of training that year, your certification is potentially forfeit by the state. And these courses each year vary. We had one year that focused heavily on autism spectrum, communication with people on the autism spectrum. Another year had to do with traumatic brain injury and how to effectively communicate with traumatic brain injury or people exhibiting signs of traumatic brain injury, which can, of course, manifest as other mental health conditions. Then one of the blocks has been about substance use disorders. And another block was literally officer wellness, how important it is to sleep as far as managing stress. And so each year, it feels like there's new elements being added in addition to large things that may come out of state law and changes in the legislature that could happen any day. LaTexa is a great example of that, where the legislature stepped up, built a package and said, this is now required. We've engaged it and run with it. It's about as fast as we can manage. I was really impressed with our department. Completed 100% of all of our personnel main course in 2 years. I will say our other local agencies are well on track to complete 3 or 4 year window and still well within compliance standards for this law. Everyone, all local agencies have said well over half of their personnel.
And I think that's really super important that you got on top of that because there's so many things that are included and are being added to the umbrella of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that's what people really need to understand is that the LGBTQIA plus is just one thing, one item under the big category of diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a lot of other situations that would fall under that situation, right? So that would require DEI training. So because of that, do you find that maybe it gets lost amongst other maybe more critical or more emergent situations that are coming up within the community?
So I don't really think this training gets lost or the concepts of the training get lost. We do. The the big umbrella, people would like to look at police training and go, well, it's all about going to the range and shooting. It's all about fighting. It's all about driving like a maniac. It's all about doing the things that often are really fun things to do in training.
Your new recruits would really love that one thing.
Exactly. Let's go to the range and shoot. That's a
Yeah.
fun day. Assuming you're shooting well. If you're shooting bad, it becomes very frustrating and miserable because you're going to be back and back and back until you identify whatever's going on. The driving part, if we're driving fast on a closed course, is lots of fun. We're driving really slowly backwards because that's part of our skills training. It's really terrible and hard on your neck, especially as you get older. If all of those things can be a lot of fun, these other training elements don't necessarily seem as fun at the times. And it's funny, we'll see a title of a new state mandated course come up. People will immediately start grousing because they just don't understand it's new. Whatever the title could be, hey, the most fun training you've ever had. They would, that's a lie. I know it's a lie right off. Not going to, they're not even going to look at it.
Well,
But
let's be real. No, but I mean, every year when somebody's like, we have to sit down for that sexual harassment training, and you're like, ugh.
and so,
But it's the right thing to do.
and it's funny though, because even these courses that it's easy to take a pessimistic attitude when you see a title like core competency. We have I would say, a vibrant LGBTQ plus community locally. We have provided direct presence at Pride Festival for several years in a row. We have either provided presence or asked, do you want us around if there's been marches and some other things going on? And we try to honor, hey, don't come around, no problem. Or, hey, yeah, we'd like to see you there. We try to honor these requests by
Mhm.
having their events one way or another. So when you look at core competency, seriously, what is core competency? Looking at the course and going through the 2.5 hours, it was informative, it was useful, it was good information. Certainly is going to help communication and understanding better concepts, especially as a person might identify themselves in a manner we may not have been familiar with, because it's an evolving, I would say it's an evolving spectrum of definitions, and it evolves all the time. Several years ago, I got an 11-page set of definitions for the LGBTQIA plus community is what it says on that one. That still is at my desk. That is still a reference. If I see something, I'm like, let's see if it's in there because I'm not sure.
Yeah, but it's out of date
It
now,
was
Captain.
years old. I know. And so it's, and where do you pursue a new set of definitions? This one was produced by an academic source. And it's a good list, but it was 7 years ago and it is out of date. Things evolve. It changes. So it's difficult. But we find is people have this immediate visceral reaction at times to this new training type of stuff. Then they do the training like, oh, that was fine. And they move on. And they absorb the information. They try to roll it into what they.
Do you find that it's changed the environment of your, like, work environment? Because, I mean, not I and I don't know the answer to this because I don't know your force, your task force, and I don't know all the people on it, but I imagine just by doing the numbers and the percentages that there has to be somebody who's LGBTQIA that's on your payroll, right? There has to be. I don't know who they are. I don't know what they identify as or who or what, but I know that this has to have changed their environment, their work environment one way or another. Do you see that at all?
I'm not certain how I see that. What I'll say is in the past, we've had openly gay employees and we're a problem for anyone around them or the department or environment during my period here. Before that, I can't. But since I've been here for almost 19 years now, not seen a problem with it, with the relationship or relationships or the environment. What I will say is over the 18 and a half years that I've been an officer here with this department, a continuing growth of professionalism and respect and a manner of treating everybody in the building. It is a paramilitary organization. I also happen to be a member of the Air Force Reserves for almost 30 years. It's a military organization there. And of course, there is always that. I would never call it hazing. There is always just this is the environment kind of nonsense. And I will say that here, I never saw those elements of discrimination or harassment or any of those things. Here, I will say in my military job over 30 years, I've seen it evolve and see it get crushed out for the same reason. We've done more training. We've talked about it more. We've made it clear what's acceptable and unacceptable behavior. And we've grown that. In our department, I couldn't tell you right now. We have
Mm.
someone who identifies as an LGBTQIA plus person because I haven't asked, and I am not going around asking folks. If somebody came forward and gave us a complaint that, hey, I'm uncomfortable, this is my situation, and here's what it's not working about it, we're going to address it immediately.
Yeah.
It's what we do. One
And
of the
there's more resources now more than ever, statewide, federally, or nonprofit organizations that are out there to support men and women and anybody in between, whatever you identify as, for if you're working in law enforcement and you identify in the community, you have choices, options, resources that you can resort to and go to help, I mean, those things are out there now, and those things didn't exist just like a blink ago.
No, they didn't. An interesting thing launched on March 7th is a product called Cortico, which is offered by, I want to say Lexipol is a corporation, but it might be NeoGov because they're kind of tied together. Regardless, this Cortico is a wellness app financed by the legislature through the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs. Right now, I can open my phone, log into the Cortico app, and get mental health help. That is completely, what am I trying to say? Confidential. It's 100%
Mhm.
anonymous unless I choose to not have it be anonymous. and including our own local resources that we can add, our local people we talk to, including our psychologist we use as a department, addition to their list of already vetted personnel. And it includes resources for almost every imaginable situation, not only being a law enforcement officer or other first responder, also being a family member or a retiree from these professions, including avenues to access help, counseling, information for people who would identify as LGBTQ plus. And like I said, really any situation, the avenue is there, and that's on the phone provided to the officers so they have a whole nother lane. And again, the best part is it is 1,000% anonymous. The data is severed. We as a department can't see anything that our people, they can provide us a report and say 35% of your people who log in are looking at information on alcohol counts. Then we can, oh, that's something we really to know.
So sometimes some of our smaller communities will take some ideas from some of the larger communities, right? And our biggest, next largest community is Seattle. So I naturally kind of look to Seattle to see how they're doing some things. And that brings up their safe place decal, their safe place program that was started by retired Seattle police officer Jim Ritter, and that actually made its way into some of the smaller communities. I remember in Ellensburg, I saw some of the safe place decals. And if people aren't familiar with that, it was there these rainbow decals said safe place that business owners would put up in their windows, their front windows. So if somebody was being harassed or they were found themselves in danger, somebody in the LGBT community, they could go in any of those places and that would be a safe place for them. The business owner kind of signed a social contract that they would be a safe place or call 911 if they needed it. So, do we have any plans to do any more initiatives like that or have a LGBTQ liaison, or do we have one of those here or plan to have an initiative like that in our community?
So we had a proposal at one point several years ago. The safe place thing came here. And it was, but boy, it could have been as many as 7 or 8 years ago. And I think at the time we looked and looked for a partner group to do something with, and it didn't flower and develop. And we also we didn't really have a demand to do that at the time. And it's certainly something, if it came back up again, we could absolutely reconsider. We do not currently have an LGBTQ plus liaison. I frequently talk to organizations like Wenatchee Pride when they call with questions or ideas, or we're working on scheduling officers to be present for Pride Festival. But again, other members of Wenatchee Pride and other local groups, I'll certainly talk to Chief Brown as well. We were about today's event at Memorial Park 2 weeks ago. I said, hey, we're having this event. Great. The chief told me, I told the patrol crew, like, hey guys, you're going to have this event at the park. Be aware of it. And there's no request for us to be there or not to be there. Feel free to go wander through if you like, or if we don't get an opportunity because we're busy, obviously you do that. But there's always something happening. And at the same time, we have pretty open channels of communication. If we had a more specific request for that, it's something I'm sure we could honor.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you mentioned that we do have a vibrant LGBTQIA plus community that is in Wenatchee in the valley right now. When I first moved here about a decade ago, Wenatchee Pride, the organization didn't exist. Wenatchee Pride, the festival wasn't happening. I think people in the queer community were much less visible, and I've seen that transition where they feel like the community itself has become a much more safer place because of the evolution of Wenatchee Pride and the festival. But you need to have support, right? You need to have support not only from your allies in the community, but your allies in the people who run the community. And local law enforcement is a huge part of that. So I give you guys a lot of credit.
We've been really fortunate here. We've had some critical events, and we saw, for example, the Black Lives Matter protests exploding nationally and turning violent. Here, we had organizers who planned a march come to us and go, how do we do it safe? Oh, there's a lot
Yeah.
of ways to do it safely. And some of those discussions included, do you even want us anywhere near the park? No, probably not. No problem. Just so you know, we have to drive past the park over and over to get back to the police station. But beyond that, we'll do our best to just kind of avoid your area unless it creates a traffic problem. Then, of course, And similarly, Wenatchee Pride at the event at Lincoln Park a few years ago, it's the first really big event when it outgrew Pybus and really moved to
Mhm.
one place. The community called and said, what can we do? How do we get officers? And we got a couple of officers to work off duty employment and went to the park. Got very well, except that we learned there were really critical problems with the city's permitting process for events with amplification right then. But the cool thing was the city as a whole, the police department, partnered with Wenatchee Pride to actually fix a broken process that impacted every event organizer who wanted to have
Oh,
amplification at an event in the city park. It was great. The strength of the organizational team for Wenatchee Pride was very strong. We were really good at this stuff. Figured it out. Everybody going forward has a better process. It is legitimately true partnership, and it doesn't exist moment to moment. I'm not going to tell some fairy tale that every day we're talking to one group or another, or one individual or another within the LGBTQIA plus community locally. But at the same time, when we need to talk, we want to talk, and something's happening, there are open lines of communication that are exercised. And it's great.
yeah, I agree. Communication, and that's really where you started this entire conversation was you're improving your communication skills with your team and your communication skills and how they communicate with the rest of the community. And, we've kind of come full circle and you've been super generous with your time. So I'm just going to ask you one last thing, and it's kind of a double question. We have focused mainly on the LGBTQ plus community as a whole. Today is the Transgender Day of Visibility. So we just want to remember that is what we are celebrating today and exercising today. And there is that celebration at 4 o'clock today at Memorial Park. What do you feel is the biggest issue for not just the LGBTQIA community, but for the transgender community here in the Wenatchee Valley, and what would you like them to know about their rights, specifically about their rights and law enforcement?
Sure. So the biggest key overarching thing is all people have the same. Now we will have certain rights revoked, maybe by a felony conviction. You're not going to have a firearm anymore, or you can't just jump in your car and drive because you have open DUI. So you need now I can't even work blow and go. The tube you got to blow into the
People just call it a blow and
ignition
go, Edgar.
interlock device. It's ignition interlock device. So there's rights can be altered by action or by law. But the most important thing, I think, to remember for all people, our job as law enforcement is to guarantee free exercise, everyone's rights. And that oftentimes means balancing and making everyone deeply unhappy. Because how you may want to exercise your rights may offend somebody else who then wants to exercise theirs. And we end up with these kind of, I wouldn't say, I guess, viewpoint collision courses. And so that's one element. But I think one especially interesting and complicated and potentially difficult issue for transgender people is identity versus maybe apparent identity versus maybe legal identity when it comes to contact, but especially arrest. We're going to conduct a search of a person, which when we arrest you, we're going to take you into custody, into jail for the most simple thing of a theft or a DUI, all the way up to someone has warrants for something that's occurred in the past. We have to conduct a physical search, not only for our safety, but for the jail safety in the same. And that there's a sensitivity based on identity of the individual as how they identify themselves, their expressed gender, their maybe outwardly visible gender idea that someone else may see. And I think an important thing to state how you state who you are and ask if someone of a gender of your choosing is available. Because while our policies would say we would prefer that males be searched by males and females be searched by females. By the time we get to people who may be in transition and may be less identifiable as an absolute, or if there are people who are intersex or in some of the other categories in our LGBTQIA plus, as you said, about 4 pluses at the beginning definitions, we have all of these spaces. Your preference is to be searched by a certain gender. I can't always guarantee it's going to happen. You still have a depressingly small number of female officers at our department and in all of our local departments. Everyone has been having success hiring, but the likelihood of a female being, if you identify as female, prefer to be searched by a female based on your identity, we may not be able to accommodate. We'll try. but we can't always accommodate all of
Would
this.
that be accommodated if you were if it was me?
We would do our best every time.
Okay.
And that's the thing.
So
We do our
it doesnesn't matter who you are, they're gonna
It
accommodate it the best that
it
they
doesn't
can.
matter who you are. We're gonna do the best we can. Hey, I'd really rather be with you. Understand? We have no female officers on duty. We're not able to accommodate that right now. However, we will do our field search here at the jail. The jail has a slightly higher likelihood of having females on duty. Their actual search there, if that's your preference, will hopefully be honored. You should be able to much of the time.
That brings up
It's
a whole 'nother can of worms of
exactly.
conversation
Yeah,
that we can maybe save that for another day
absolutely.
because perception is reality, right? And the perception
Exactly.
of that person being searched is gonna go, "Well, they didn't give me a female because they thought, they
But
misgendered me," right? And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong either,
but again, with the
but the
communication
worth
part,
maybe another conversation that can be enlightening as well.
but
But
for an individual who may be subject to a search because of arrest or other condition like that, clearly stating, "Hey, this is how I identify, and I would really prefer to be searched by
mhm.
male, female," then we can at least attempt to accommodate that as opposed to going into it blind and again having a perception issue or make assumptions and have it,
Right?
not be ideal and make a situation that is undoubtedly already not very much fun worse. And that's nobody. We don't need to do that as a community. We don't need to do that as an agency. We don't need to do that to each other. We can do the best we can every day. Some days it's not going to work out to be the best situation, but if we continue to move forward on the arc that we're doing our best to meet people's needs, our department mission, we promote a safe community and quality of life protections. That's our deal. Trying to protect, we're trying to serve, and all we can do is promote that quality of life and that safe community. We can't provide it. We all in this together.
That is the deal. I like it. Protect and serve and promote a good quality of life. And I thank you so much. You have been very, very nice and generous with your time today. And I know you're super busy and had a weird week, admittedly. So thank you again for sitting down with me. This is a really important issue and you proved that it is an important issue by taking the time today. So I appreciate it.
No problem, Nikki. Have a good day.